Having already covered more than a fair bit of wrestling on this channel, this is another one of those videos that's kind of a no-brainer. Why not combine two things that I love? Wrestling and microcomputers, together at last. Now sure, the results may generally not be very good. It'll surprise very few people to know that we have a lot of utter garbage to go through in the 13 games I've picked out in this video, but it's not like it's a generic sort of crapness either. We've got some utterly strange affairs here. We're going to see famous cartoon characters fighting aliens. We've got ancient attempts at CD-ROM style multimedia games, some of the most broken games I've ever seen, and I would say at least a dozen guys that look sort of like Hulk Hogan. There's a lot of interesting stuff here, that's for sure. So let's not waste any more time. Let's get it on! Let's begin with one of the better games here, and one that a few people are likely to know. Rock and Wrestle, a 1985 computer game by Melbourne House. It came out on most platforms, although it's most famous on C64, and it's one of the first wrestling games of any note. Not the absolute first even on microcomputers, that honour goes to a frankly miserable port of Data East's Tag Team Wrestling, but probably the first that people generally enjoyed. You've got a few characters to fight against with your main dude, who to my eyes looks a bit like Ken Patera. You'll be facing a motley crew of various stereotypes that we're gonna see variations of in most games, to be honest, and your objective is to bash through all of them as much as your heart desires. Either that or just have a few matches with your mates. Naturally, there's some parts of this game that haven't held up too well. I will be honest and say that I've never quite managed to figure out how you actually play this game too good. All the button bashing in the world doesn't ever seem to help me actually win a grapple. Looking at videos of people who know what they're doing, I can see that the game is a bit broken if you just flat out play to win it. If you get your opponent on the mat, it's kind of easy to stomp his health straight down to 0 and pin him immediately. But if you play it to screw around and have a bit more fun, well, you'll probably have just that. The main thing about the game is that for 1985, the animation is really, really good. The exaggerated moves are a lot of fun, all the airplane spins and whatnot, and the low quality speech is very endearing. To be honest, there's more animation in this 1985 game than most of the other games we're going to see in this video. And again, this is one of the very first pro wrestling games. That should prepare you mentally for some of the lousy stuff we're going to see. This is quite a fun game to watch, not necessarily a great game to play, but it does certainly deserve a mention when it comes to the history of the wrestling video game genre. Championship Wrestling, a C64 game by Epix from 1986, is another game that belongs on the OK pile. This was at one point set to be a WWF licensed game, and if it had been, it would have been the first one ever, but it never materialised, and instead we get the mix of guys who look sorta like folks you may know, as well as good old Russian stereotypes, Native American stereotypes, Middle Eastern stereotypes, that sort of thing, you get the idea. You can either have a quick little practice match against the computer, or you can get as many as 8 people together for a tournament, which is quite a nice touch actually, if you happen to have 7 friends who fancied their chances in the squared circle. The graphics for this actually look quite nice for what is, again, a pretty early game. Hell, it looks like a C64 Fire Pro, what with the isometric rin and all that. There's even some cool details like the changing banners in the crowd and, again, some not all that bad move animation. It's generally a quick game. Health bars go down very fast once you get a few moves going, although they do regenerate fairly quickly, which I guess allows for a little bit of momentum. Again, it's not necessarily brilliant. When I say quickly, I do mean it, as winning matches are often simply a matter of getting a couple of strikes in, hitting a move and then pinning the opponent. It's only an okay game. But, like I said, in this world, being okay is enough to be one of the best games in the video, I'm afraid. We'll see later on. So what game had the honour of being the first ever World Wrestling Federation tie-in? That would be Micro League Wrestling from 1987, which also doubles up as one of the more unique wrestling titles ever released. This isn't your usual joystick waggling and button mashing action. Instead, it's a strategy game of sorts with a pretty high level of presentation for the time. We've got text commentary, we've got a crowd with proper noises, and we've got the actual wrestlers in the flesh. Well, in digitised picture form anyway. Micro League Wrestling tried its best to bring the proper spectacle of a big match home to your computer. The original disc featured 2 such events, with Hulk Hogan taking on Randy Savage on one side, and Hulk Hogan taking on Paul Orndorff on the other. If you don't like Hulk Hogan, well, screw you, buddy. Go watch some Russian wrestling or something, you lousy commie bastard. How does the game work then? Both wrestlers have a list of moves: basic moves, major moves, and a special move. You and the opponent pick a move, the hidden die are rolled, and one of you succeeds. Said move is then played out with the help of text commentary, digitised images, and appropriate noises. The quality of such things naturally depends on the platform. It looks perfectly okay on the Amiga, for example, but this was also on Commodore 64, which I think it's fair to say is a noble effort, just to, be kind. Basic moves obviously have the most chance of landing. You're probably best off doing a few of those before attempting the major moves, and once you've dealt enough damage to your opponent you can try and perform the special move. This move is the only way to pin your opponent and win the match. You can also perform a block which, if successful, recovers a little bit of your energy. Later incarnations of the game also allowed faces to rally the crowd and recover more damage, and heels to cheat, which obviously does a lot of damage but risks disqualification. It's quite fun, for a bit anyway. It is very slow paced, it doesn't take too long to see all the things, and you may well get bored before a match actually finishes. However, I can imagine that back in 1987, this was freaking amazing. You can actually see the wrestlers as they were on the telly, as if they were in your own home. If you have nostalgia for this, then it's probably going to be pretty strong, and if you don't, you likely won't get it. There's certainly very few other wrestling games like this one, especially in the West. We may as well stick with the WWF for a game that I myself do have a lot of nostalgia for, believe me. Ocean's WWF WrestleMania, which came out in 1991 and was sort of presented like a computer port of Technos' arcade games, meaning Superstars and WrestleFest. Now comparing this to WrestleFest would be like sticking Special Delivery Jones in the ring against Andre the Giant, but even if this game isn't good, it certainly holds a place in my heart. This is the first wrestling game that I ever owned. 1991 was the year I started watching wrestling, due to being lucky enough for the family to have Sky, and I could now play as my favourites. Well, 3 of them anyway. Still, those 3 were Hulk Hogan, the Ultimate Warrior, and the British Bulldog. And that's more than enough for any 6-year-old kid who's starting to fall in love with the WWF. So you pick your guy and then they battle against a selection of heels on their way to the belt. You've got to get through Mr. Perfect, the Warlord, the $1 Million Man, the Mountie, and finally Sergeant Slaughter. Before each match you even have a bit of a promo exchange and jawjack with your next opponent, where you get to choose an appropriate response to their insults. The controls are pretty simple. You get a punch and a kick, a strong drop kick, there's a running attack, a stomp on the ground, and so on. And of course, there's the grappling. When wrestlers come together, they lock up, and it's time to waggle that joystick furiously. You'll be doing this a lot in every match, so if you play this game a fair bit, you could well expect to break your quick shot or bug or bloody Terminator characteristic or whatever you've chosen to play the game with before too long. A modern controller with a nice D-pad does kind of trivialise the waggling. Win the grapple, and you perform your special move. Knock the opponent's health down to 0, pin him, and move on to the next bout. Yeah, it's pretty simple. It's kind of crap. But still, nostalgia prevents me from giving it any kind of bashing, at least when it comes to the Spectrum version. This was a part of my formative love of professional wrestling, so, you know, to me it's a classic, even though it is rubbish. Alas, Ocean, by way of Arc Developments, followed WrestleMania up in 1992 with a game that was much worse, European Rampage. This game bumps up the playable characters from 3 to 4, and you now have to pick 2 of them, choose a team out of Hogan, Warrior, Randy Savage and Bret Hart, and then go against several teams in different venues. You have to fight the Nasty Boys, the Natural Disasters and Money Inc. 3 times before finally facing the Legion of Doom for the title. Now, this is all terrible here on Amiga, you can probably see that for yourself, but it's nothing compared to the Commodore 64 version. Here on the C64, well, obviously the already poor graphics here are even worse. You can kinda tell that this game was made with no love or even basic knowledge of wrestling. Most of the time when you pin someone, they're actually lying on their front, which, if you know your wrestling, you'll know makes absolutely no sense. Unless you're Cameron. The 2 most effective attacks in the game are rolling into them on the ground like something out of a freaking Three Stooges short, or dodging running attacks, because the CPU will do those constantly, hurting themselves every time. The animation is pathetic. There's a backbreaker which literally just reuses the standing kick animation. The most amusing part of the game, however, is that it's not a tag team game anymore on the C64. We're back to singles matches. Now, does this mean that your guy has to go against the WWE's top heels? The likes of Ric Flair, Sid Justice, Jake Roberts, The Undertaker, even Papa Bloody Shango? No. Arc Developments, in their infinite wisdom, just picked one wrestler from the tag teams that were in the MIGI version, and amazingly, they picked the worst choice every time. Basically, you have to fight Typhoon, Jerry Sags, and IRS 3 times before you face Animal for the championship. Animal. This is, without question, the most pathetic lineup of opponents in wrestling game history. I mean, it could have been Earthquake, Brian Knobbs, Ted DiBiase and Hawk, and that still isn't great, but this? Holy shit. This is a game filled with what the OSW review folk would call boys, and they're not even good boys at that. They're the shittiest possible boys, in fact. Jeez, the state of this tribe. One of the worst official WWF tie-in games ever. If not the worst, full stop, to be honest. It's even worse than WWE 2K20. Okay, that's about all there is when it comes to official games for the WWF and so on. Now we tread into some murkier waters. The ones with no branding at all. The budget games and the like, where we find weirdness and crapness far beyond what we've seen already. Yes, even worse than European Rampage. We start with something relatively inoffensive. WWF Superstars by Codemasters for the ZX Spectrum. This came out very late, February 1993, which I do believe makes it the last title that Cody's released on the ZX Spectrum. Naturally, their hype machine is still in rude health. The cassette inlay promises real graphics, whatever that means. None of those fake graphics here, I suppose. Are they saying that you're actually going to be able to see what's going on in this game? Because, well, thank God for that. The cover also features Hulk Hogan, or at least someone that looks almost exactly like him, to the point where this obviously unlicensed cover art could have landed Cody's in legal hot water, if the WWF had ever been aware of this obscurity. Speaking of which, as this is the last Cody's title on Specky, this game is quite rare. It's not exactly DJ Puff in terms of value, but it will take you a fair bit of time to find if you decide to buy it for whatever reason. if you're going for like a complete Cody's collection or whatever. Is it worth spending that time on to find? Well, no. Although it's not overtly terrible. The music's nice at least. You play as the Darling Dude, the muscular Hogan-esque brother of Cody's head honchos Richard and David, I presume, and face off against equally alliterative but more heelish opponents on your way to some title or other. The move selection is, as you might expect, minimal. You can punch, you can run, and waggle your joystick to perform a big slam, and that's about it. Weirdly, there's no actual free counts in the game. You can pin your opponent, but it only saps their energy. However, when they're nearly down to 0, this is the most efficient way to get him there, which ends the round. Every bout is the best of 3 rounds, and yeah, there's not really much else to say. Basically, it's like a budget version of WWF WrestleMania. Although, if you do get stuck with it, well, you could always call one of Codemaster's 0891 tip lines to get a surefire strategy to win the game. Calls only cost 36p per minute at off-peak times, 48p all other times, and make sure you get the permission of whoever pays the phone bill first so that we don't get sued. Codemasters. They could be such knackers. Actually, this being such a late game, I don't think they bothered to create an 0891 line for Wrestling Superstars, so you're probably shit out of luck. Oh well, this being such a mediocre game, it's not exactly the end of the world now, is it? So much for Codemaster's contribution to the world of old wrestling games. Let's have a look at the much stranger game offered up by another UK budget game label, that being Alternative. There's certainly some oddities to be found in this company's library, but perhaps none more so than Popeye 3 Wrestle Crazy, another late release from 1992. To think that once upon a time everyone's favourite spinach-munching sailor man starred in a famous and memorable title by the almighty Don Priestley. Alas, those days have long passed. Mind you, if you know your Popeye, you might not think that the idea of him wrestling is all that odd. He's a strong man, he likes to get into fights, and he even did a bit of wrestling here and there in the comics. But he isn't wrestling Bluto for the sake of protecting olive oil here. He's wrestling in outer space, because, well, who the hell even knows? The plot says that Popeye has to save the world from something called the Crags, just sounds like a sexually transmitted disease, by representing Earth in an intergalactic wrestling contest. Which I guess is fair enough. But then you meet your first opponent and it's quite literally a xenomorph from the Alien movies. There's no mistaking it. Back in these final days of the 8-bit micro, seriously, in terms of copyright you could get away with murder. The action features more limited moves and a lot more joystick waggling. I mean, seriously, most of these games will definitely give you a bit of a Popeye-style arm workout if you play them enough, not to mention costing you a fortune in replacement sticks. Items also get thrown into the ring. Hamburgers replenish your health, spinach powers you up, and enough of it allows you to perform Popeye's Turbo Typhoon special move, and bombs hurt you. It's, well, it's certainly different. About on the same level as Wrestling Superstars gameplay-wise, although the graphics are better and it is a fair bit more memorable. I mean, where else can you control Popeye and punch out a xenomorph? This is truly a game that stands on its own. Although, I don't think many would want to stand near it, to be fair. You may well think that Popeye 3 Wrestle Crazy looks quite naff, but it's frickin' WWF No Mercy compared to the next thematically similar game we're looking at. Sadly, we couldn't do this video about microcomputer wrestling games and not go to the C64 for a dreaded bout of Intergalactic Cage Match, which is, without question, the worst wrestling game ever made. Nothing comes close. You may know it already if you're familiar with Ashen's video on it, but if you don't, well, let's endure it. Not that there's much here, but what is here will boggle the mind. This game came out courtesy of another budget label, Mastertronic, and was unleashed onto the world in 1987. Once you've gotten over the hideous, and I really do mean hideous, title music, you have a range of characters to choose from. The Hulk Hogan ripoff is here as usual, but you can also play as Hagar the Horrible, the Fly from the David Cronenberg movie, a really big Smurf, and various other visually displeasing characters. This is all you can really do in the game. Choose a character, choose an opponent, and then fight against either some other poor bastard who's playing this with you, or the computer. And the action, well, it's something else, again. When you play the game and actually choose to fight with the opponent, it's mainly a question of pressing buttons at random. There's no point in strategy. It being a cage match, the goal is to beat the opponent down enough so that he stays down long enough for you to climb out, which doesn't take long. I quickly want to point out the animation cycles and just how broken they are. I mean, holy hell, the Hulk Hogan copy literally explodes in one of the frames when he's getting up. But that is far from the most objectionable thing about this game. Nothing that I said about the gameplay actually matters at all, because you can literally hold left at the start of a bout, climb up the cage, and the opponent can do absolutely sweet Fanny Adam about it. You just go up to the top and you win. Amazing, eh? The game must have gone through literally nanoseconds of testing. Hilariously enough, it is possible to shake the cage, but only when no one is climbing it. We have truly reached a critical mass of shit. I think you'll likely agree with me that this is the worst wrestling game ever. This is the top trump card, the joker in the pack. You draw this, and you automatically win. What's even more surprising perhaps is who developed it. Frickin' Sculptured Software. Amazingly, they would make more wrestling games. A lot more. In fact, they would be the main producer of WWF games back in the early to mid-90s. Thankfully, they got a lot better at it. Their games, the likes of WWF Raw and Royal Rumble, are, well, just average really, but that's complete bliss compared to their first attempt. They even had another go at a steel cage-centric game, WWF Steel Cage Challenge. Now this game was absolute bollocks, but it's still 1,000 times better than Intergalactic Cage Match. But I suppose that, having made all these other much better wrestling games, Sculptured Software did manage to right the massive wrong they created with Intergalactic Cage Match. Sort of, anyway. Now, in all honesty, there is no real way to top Intergalactic Cage Match. It's the crown jewel of gaming wrestle crap, both in terms of the expression and the shitty Saudi blood money show. But there's still some other games to show off at the video's end, 5 to be precise, and we'll run through them fairly quickly just to finish things off. Here's another lousy budget title that somehow managed to get a known wrestler on board, Sergeant Slaughter's Mat Wars for the C64. This is sort of different in a way in that you play as both a manager and a wrestler. You start by bidding on the wrestler you want in an auction, and then you're away. It all looks promising, but there's nothing to really do between bouts other than bet on your wrestler, or try and fix up another match. And then when you get to actually wrestling, well, it's not good in the slightest. There doesn't seem to be much hit detection or just anything at all, really. A cool concept, but the execution is utterly disappointing. Things don't get too much better with Zeppelin Games' American Tag Team Wrestling, it has to be said. There's not a whole lot to say here, as a lot of the things that are bad about this game are things we've seen before in other lousy titles like European Rampage. It's a thoroughly simplistic game that again came out late in 1992, by which time a lot of companies didn't really care too much about what they were putting out for the micros. If I were to summarise it, I'd say it's an utterly inferior in every way take on Rock and Wrestle. And that game, by this time even, was 7 years old. So yeah, it's rubbish. If you're looking for tag team action, maybe you can find something in Body Slam on the C64 instead. Now this is actually a port from the arcade of Sega's game by Software Creations, meaning two things. One, that we do get an awesome soundtrack courtesy of Tim Follin, and two, that the game isn't very good. Still, this is a port of the game that was known as Dump Matsumoto in Japan, and consists of Dump's army going against the Quash Girls. An awesome bit of fun for fans of 80s Joshi Puro. They're all still in this port, albeit with sillier names that kinda make them sound like relatives of the fat slags from vids. The game itself has very annoying controls. It feels impossible to actually move diagonally for some reason. But, it's not completely horrible. At least it doesn't involve too much joystick waggling. Lastly, there's 2 Amiga games to look at. The rather obscure Italian game Top Wrestling is the first one up, and it's actually not too bad. In that, there's hit detection and the wrestlers can move around properly. There's a whole bunch of wrestlers, mostly Jimmy Hart versions of folks like Brutus Beefcake, Ultimate Warrior, Sergeant Slaughter and, of course, Hulk Hogan. It's not all that varied, especially as everyone has basically the exact same moveset, but it's not too terrible when it comes to being a very basic arcadey wrestling game. And we end on a thoroughly low note. International Championship Wrestling, published by Hewson in 1990. This one spoils you utterly by giving you all of 3 wrestlers to choose from. The action is utterly incomprehensible, ugly as sin, and most of the time it doesn't feel like my wrestler can even bloody move. I never figured this game out beyond doing a punch. I did try, but the controls are utterly inscrutable. What's even weirder is that the game nicks both the old WWF Royal Rumble music and Delirious by Prince for its music, as in samples from the actual frickin' songs. Clearly no one bothered to check the game before release as well. This could have resulted in ruinous lawsuits. I mean, WWF's bad enough, but taking stuff from Prince? God help you. But no one noticed budget Amiga games back then, and there are many copyright violations. Anywho, this would be the worst game featured in just about any video except for this one, thanks to the existence of Intergalactic Cage Match. Still, it continues the low standards set by most of the games we've featured here. I've done a few of these compilation vids now, and it's fair to say that of all of them, this video features the worst titles by far. There is very little that is redeemable here. But there's no way you can say that we haven't seen anything interesting. Not when there's Popeye pinning a xenomorph's shoulders down on the mat for the 3-second tan. Bye for now. Thanks for watching this video. Now if you like this video, please do comment on it. Be sure to have a look at my social media, particularly my Twitter, and if you like my stuff, you want to support it, you want to see exclusive stuff such as wrestling videos for example, have a look at my Patreon. You could join this list of awesome people right here. Alexa Jones-Gonzalez, Andrew Dalton, Andy Capt, Arcade LY Webmaster, Asobi Kwan DX, Brian Henniger, Chris, Conrad Pritchard, D. Zalior, Rimwan Sutter, Dave Cook, David Rose, Dinty76538, Dustin Cooper, Gary Samaden, Geordie Alex, Glunnotheth, Jay is Manchild, James Brown, Jason Stevens, Jace Alexander, Jeff Ladd, Lucas Kuligovsky, Matthias Gramzov, Martin Pataki, Nate Milbank, Potter Margel, Renby Mon, Rusty Kelly, Seth Robinson, Simon Gulliver, Stuart Christopher Brownlee, Tariq Amir, Tim Wald, Yerka Operator, and to all the rest of the community, all my wonderful, wonderful fans and supporters, thank you so much, and goodbye.